Okay.
Oh, well, here, and you even told
Hi,
us.
everyone. Thank you for joining us today on Communicating with Teens. My name is Alyssa. I am going to be your host. I am an elementary school teacher by trade, and I also have 4 kids, one of whom is a teenager. So I do hold this conversation dear to my heart. Samantha, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'd love to. My name is Samantha Leibarger, and I'm a counselor at Chesterfield Counseling Associates. I've been practicing since 2015, and I primarily work with teens and adults. And so I'm excited to be on this panel, talk a little bit about some teens because they are just such a joy. It's so fun to work with teens in my line of work, and so I primarily work with trauma, but I also work with a variety of other things like anxiety, depression, and some other things too, working with just focusing on, I don't know if you're familiar with somatic therapy, but focusing on how do we connect with our body and connect our emotions so that we're instead of disintegrated, we become an integrated whole again. So those are some of the things that I focus on in my counseling, but yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
I forgot to mention that's important. You mentioned your children. I'd like to mention mine. I have 3 kids. They're wonderful. None of whom are teens, so I'm not walking that road yet. But yeah, I know I will be there soon. My 7-year-old girl is 7 going on teens. So
yeah,
I can only imagine. So
yeah, soon enough, and you'll be like, darn, I really wish they were 7 again. But I mean, like you said, teens are so great. I mean, they are their own unique selves. They have this personality. It's just sometimes getting through to them that is the tough part for their parents. So, all right, I will come down to you, Kevin, if you want to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alyssa. I'm also a counselor here at Chesterfield Counseling Associates. I've been practicing since about 2021. And I work a lot with teens and families, and I just find there to be such a rich ground for growth and healing, especially in the area of communication. I mean, so many issues that I see walking through my door, whether it be with the teen by themselves or specifically with the family or with adult couples, is around communication, and it's around roadblocks to these communication, where there's so much that the people, whatever the parties are involved, want to work through and want to work towards, but they're just missing each other, constantly just missing each other. And so in that space, I really enjoy helping to see teens and parents come together on a solid mutual ground and really learn to actually speak each other's languages, both with coaching and counseling with the teens, and also coaching and counseling with the parents as well.
I love how you said that, speaking each other's languages, because sometimes it does feel like, I know I've said in the past, like, am I even speaking like English? Do you know what I'm saying? And it does sometimes truly feel like you are speaking a different language. And so I love the way that you said that. So this question is going to go to both of you. I don't know who wants to go first, whoever starts talking first, but I'm wondering what the world was like when you were a teenager. Kind of what were your hobbies? How did you foster relationships? How did you find your way through adolescence? If you could kind of talk to us about what that looked like for you.
No, we wait.
Samantha. Samantha.
All right. I guess I can jump in. I remember growing up I'm actually born and raised in Michigan. And so it's a beautiful state. I grew up in Holland, Michigan, which is, in case anyone isn't familiar, I can do the stereotypical hand here, and I'm about like right here. And so it's right along the shoreline of Lake Michigan. It's just beautiful. So a lot of outdoor time was kind of normal for our family. However, I do remember there being technology in my life, primarily television. And
our connection might have just got a little weird. Kevin, are you saying that, is there technology?
Yeah, I'm here with you. I'm here with you, Alyssa.
Okay. Samantha is frozen right now. So
if you want, I can jump in until she comes back.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. And I'm sure. Yeah, she'll unfreeze here in a minute.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So for me, growing up, I was born in the early 90s. And so I kind of grew up
And
with the kind of advent of
so
technology.
we
There,
would
she's coming back.
watch like cartoons.
Oh, and she's gone. Okay, we'll go.
Technology.
Oh, it's so
So
good.
growing up,
So
hopefully she'll come back in.
she will. We'll go with you, and then I'm sure she'll pop back on, and then we'll just let her know that we didn't hear what she said. So
Beautiful.
go ahead.
So yeah, I was really growing up with the advent of technology, but my parents were very much not a big into having a lot of technology in the house. And so I remember it was such a huge deal when I was probably, 13 years old or 14 years old, and my parents actually allowed me to get a GameCube for the first time, and it was such a huge deal. But for me, a lot of it was spent, I grew up in the church, so it was a lot of social activities centered around the church and whatnot. My dad really liked being in the outdoors, at least. And so we went hiking quite a bit. But my kind of time as an adolescent, I'm the youngest of three, and I was very much a people pleaser. That was kind of my story. And so my phase through adolescence wasn't sort of typical rebellion. It was very much just trying to make everybody happy and keep the peace, while my middle child brother rebelled and my oldest sister kind of went away and did her own thing. And so kind of going through that path, it's been really interesting now looking back, especially as I work with teens. I feel like I have a whole new appreciation development of kind of prototypical adolescence.
Right.
And how vitally important it is for teens to push back against the parents and push back against the family system. As intensely difficult as it is for the family system and for the parents, but like for the teens, they're going through this process of finding their own voice, of determining who they are. And I think for those of us who don't go through that phase, or at least don't go through that phase until later in life, there's definitely this sense of who am I that comes out. There comes into this kind of stage of life that comes in later than adolescence. That's kind of an identity crisis. You get these quarter life crises that are identity crisis, because it's like, okay, I spent my whole life living for other people, and now I'm out on my own. Who am I? And so I kind of really appreciate and respect the developmental portion of adolescence and just what that does for the developing identity of the person, and how important it is for kind of parents to understand that in the midst of the crazy difficulty as their kids, sneak out of the house, curse at them, yell at them, refuse to do the things that the parents know that they are good for them. And as stressful as that is for the parents, to hold that stress and tension with, this is my child becoming their fuller self, and they have to go through this storm to get there. How can I, as a parent, support them in that, while also not just becoming neglectful and not doing anything, which is an incredibly hard line to walk.
It is. Yes. And I think, you just portrayed it beautifully. I think that's the struggle that a lot of parents have, because it feels like we know we love our children. We know what's best for them. We know what's best for our children. And so they're not listening to us, or they're doing other things. And you're like, wait, hold on a second. I'm the one who has your best interest at heart. So, Samantha, we cut off right after you told us about how beautiful Holland, Michigan was. So I'm going to circle back to you.
It's the most important part, so it's okay.
Yeah, I've been to Holland, and it is beautiful. I love that part of Michigan. So I was very in awe of you when you said you got to grow up there. But we'll come back so you can finish up kind of what it looked like for you.
Yeah. And if we've already moved on to the next part, and that is totally okay. I'm willing to go with the flow.
Okay. All right. So hopefully no more technology glitches from here on out. So we'll stick with you, Samantha. What would you say are some big differences with teens today versus, say, teens 20 years ago or teens 30 years ago?
Yeah. I think, and I don't know, because I'm so sorry I wasn't able to hear what you said about growing up, Kevin. I missed that. But I'm sure one of the things that was mentioned is like technology is the most striking difference between teens then and teens now.
Yep.
I'm sure many teens then can still remember when, you know, the internet became a thing and they could even have a computer, and then they had to do the slow dial-up, like, you know, like I still know the sound, like to this day, I know the whole song. It feels like a song. And you know, just like how cool it was to have instant messenger AOL, you know, like,
Yep.
and no one knows what I'm talking about, I'm sure, if you're any younger than we are, but so I think that's the most striking difference is we had to always wait to even have our technology, and it was naturally boundaried for us. Like if a show was on TV, it was on TV. If you miss it, you miss it. You know, if you know, if you're on, I remember when I got a phone, and even texting, you had to press the same button like 3 times to get that not like letter, right?
Yes.
And it was not like, I mean, it was like a really big, clunky, thick phone. And I remember when I had a game and it was Snake, you know, and it was getting the dots.
Yes.
Yeah, such a great game. But
We must
that-
all be the same age. Like I feel like we must all be the same age. Because everything you're saying, I'm saying yes, and I'm looking up at Kevin and he's agreeing. So we must all be of the
We're just
same.
reminiscing on our childhood memories.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's just, even in that little game though, I mean, you had to slowly wait for the snake to get the dot. Like it was even a slow moving snake, and it was
Yep.
just literally like pixels, black pixels. And so everything now is so different, where things are fast and things are moving and things are much more like immediate, and children are being exposed to technology much quicker at younger ages because it's just so accessible and because it's so much a part of our lives. You know, I think that that's the most striking difference. Actually, another one that I noticed that I actually find fascinating is that teens now, in my opinion, have a lot more like, how do I phrase this? Their parents are able to be a part of their life in a more like watchful eye kind of way than even when I grew up. Like, for example, you know, just Life 360, you
Mhm.
can always track your teen at all times, no matter where they are. And you know, if they turn off Life 360, like that's a no-no, you know? And so like, what are they up to? But the whole point is I was never tracked. Like my parents didn't know where I was, you know, if I left the house, they're just like, hey, call me, let me know where you are. And then they just, you know, there's a little bit more of this, like, they don't always, they don't have like a satellite imagery of where I am in the world, you know? And I feel like almost essentially that's what teens have now. And so even with their friends, like, you know, always at all times what your friend is doing. Whereas before, if a friend was hanging out with someone and then like I talk with them later and they're like, oh, we went to so-and-so's, we might either think, oh, that's super fun, tell me more. Or, you know, I say, oh, well, I want to go next time, let me know. And they're like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. So there's no miscommunication with that. Whereas now, literally on Snapchat, your little face is shown up on your location everywhere you go. And you know if there's a party because all the little dots are conformed in one spot at one person's house. And so you either just show up because there's a lot of dots there, or you're super heartbroken because you're like, how come I'm not one of those dots, you know?
Yes.
And so whereas when before we had the art of communication face to face and avoidance of, you know, miscommunication, and the art of being vulnerable and asking like, hey, I'd really like to come next time.
Yeah.
That's kind of like taken away from some of our teens now, to where they're just like, they're more just, I'm immediately left out with no communication, and they don't know the full story, but they make a lot of assumptions. And it also, no one wants to see you having fun with friends and you're not invited. So it's kind of a hard social dynamic for them
Yeah.
too.
So, and that kind of leads me to my next question. So, Kevin, I guess, and I'm not sure if I'm explaining it correctly, but it's important, I feel like, for us to understand, but parents of teens to understand their reality in adolescence, but then also understand their child or their teen's reality in adolescence isn't the same as theirs. And so, and it's not going to be the same as theirs. So why either is that so important, or how can parents kind of wrap their head around that, because everyone says, well, back in my day or when I was younger, but the deal is like, it's not going to ever be that way again. And it is so different now. There is so much technology. So how can we get parents to understand that or to accept that? Would you have any thoughts on that topic?
I think you said a key word there, and that's acceptance. A big part, and Sam was saying this a minute ago, is with the sort of watchfulness that we have, the level of access parents have now to their children's activities, result in a lot of really good oversight, a lot of good protection.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it really enhances, I believe, a parent's anxiety. And it really enhances a parent's anxiety, and because they have the ability now to go and check on Life 360, or even, like look on this app or that app. Or before, it was like, yeah, maybe they could call, or they could call friends' houses and see where they're at. But a lot of it was just like, okay, we have to learn to tolerate our own anxiety as a parent earlier on. And so a big part of that acceptance is something I work with a lot of parents on, is how can we learn to tolerate your anxiety, your very understandable, very real anxiety, as you go through this developmental crisis of your own, from this tiny little infant baby who is completely dependent upon you, to to a toddler who's pretty dependent on you, to a teenager who is very little dependent upon you outside of practical needs. And in fact, not just very little dependent outside of practical needs, but even is actively pushing against that dependence. And so you're going through your own developmental crisis of like, I've been trained for however many years, a decade plus, to come when they call, to be worried about them when I can't see them. And now all of a sudden I'm supposed to just let them go. But what could happen to them? They could get hurt, they could die, they could go to jail, like all these understandable fears, especially with all the stuff that's out there in the world and the information we have as just general people. But a big part of that has to be sort of self-regulation of anxiety, and helping for parents get your needs met. Have, friends, have support groups, have your own therapists, etc., because your needs are vital, and you getting your needs satisfied is directly correlated with your teen getting their needs satisfied. And so often I see parents who are just trying to like, I'm fine. I want to help my kid. I want you to help my kid. I want people to help my kid, but I'm fine. And I'm like, but you're not. And of course you're not. Of course you're not.
And also to that point of, we parents, the anxiety of, number one, letting a child go, essentially, like letting them become their own person, but all kinds of, bad things, kids making choices about sneaking out, or drugs or alcohol, or all these things, they all happened 30 years ago. Parents just weren't necessarily hyper aware of it. I mean, I'm sure they knew that things were happening and they weren't going to make good choices. But now, like you said, you can track your kids. You can see their Facebook pages or Instagram pages, or you can see things. And so it's just, I can totally see how that's amped up parents' anxiety, to now parents are maybe even a little more controlling of their teens now, because now they can see, everything that's going on. So
yeah, and that's that really perfect storm of the kids can be more independent than ever, because one, teens nowadays are almost without fail more technologically literate than their parents. And so they know more about technology. So they have more access to be able to solve their own problems, look up the answers to their questions, go on ChatGPT and have them write a resume for them, right? Like all these things that we didn't have growing up. And, especially, our parents, definitely didn't have growing up. And so there's this increase in the ability for teens to be self-sufficient, while also this increase in parents' exposure to negative information, negative stimuli, and the whereabouts and the activities of their kids, not just their kids, the kids around them, that it's just this perfect storm of anxiety and stress. And I see so much of that in my room, where the kid is just like, I'm running away from my parents because being at home is stressful, because they're always yelling at me or stressed about me, or they constantly want to know everything. And it becomes very much this push-pull dynamic where the parents are anxiously pursuing the kid and the kids are avoidantly pushing away at the parents, and the relationship falls apart.
Yeah. Good points that you're making. So Samantha, I think you touched on it earlier, how you said technology was one of the things that, is a huge divide between how we grew up, or, anyone even older than us grew up, and then how kids are growing up now. So teens are, and always have been, teens today were born with technology. They've always been immersed in it. How have they been wired differently because of that?
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the big questions people ask because there is such an explosion in technology. So it's really caught a lot of researchers' attention, but it's caught, our attention as well as parents. I think that we know kind of already how quickly addictive all that technology was, even for us. Like I know for me, and when I was on AOL Messenger or wherever it might be, like I was so excited. That's what I looked forward to doing. At the end of the day to go from when I got back from school. So I think that as it's been researched, we have actually found that and am I still, is the connection still okay?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
so. Am I frozen?
You are
Just your
not.
video.
Just my
Oh, from
video.
you.
Yep. You can hear my voice. So,
I can hear your voice and your video is not frozen. So
oh,
you're
okay.
okay.
Okay. So
Weird.
yes, we're good. Keep going.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. And so anyway, what they've found as they've continued to kind of research this and look into this question of like, how is technology affecting our brains? How is it affecting our kids? How is it affecting our society? They found things that were actually both good and negative. Like there are some surprising benefits to the technology on our brains that have already come to see, which I was kind of like pleasantly surprised to hear because,
Yeah.
you're expecting it to be this horrid of like, look at this terrible way it's destroying us.
Yeah.
And there actually are some positives. And yet, of course, yes, there are some negatives. And so I guess I can just start kind of talking about a little bit. I actually have a study that I'd been looking at earlier, and it's about brain health consequences of digital technology use. And let me see. And I can also add this. Is there a way we can post this for
Yeah.
people?
If you want to post it or just send the link in the chat, I can make sure to when I post this, I will link it in the comments.
Sure. And I think really the biggest takeaway from this, honestly, was the persistent use of the technology. I think that was one of the keynote that I took away from this was that the persistence of it. So for example, the just technology in and of itself, it requires you to have constant multitasking, but also like immediate gratification. And so some of those things are causing cognitive performance and like things that are causing like ADHD symptoms. And it's interesting because it's not just children and adolescents, it can be for someone of any age, which I found very interesting. So
Yeah.
it's actually something that there's multiple studies that have compared this link with again, that excessive use to the ADHD symptoms. And the other one was impaired emotional and social intelligence. And so what they're seeing is people and they did two different studies. One was where the children went off, no technology use, kind of at like this outdoors camp. And then the other one where they say, okay, you're just kind of doing life, but make sure you're at least 4 hours of screen time a day or more.
Wow.
Yeah. And what they found is that the people that were participants for the nature camp, they actually had significantly better recognition of nonverbal and emotional social cues than participants who continued their daily screen time. So they're actually finding that there's a difference there that is being marked and noticeable. And of course, too, the way we talked briefly before, the way technology works, these just with the misinterpretation of social cues and environments and just constant self-comparison to you and some stranger on Instagram or Twitter or whatever you're looking at. There's a lot of that going on too. But also addiction is a big thing we're seeing. And I'm sure you guys are fully aware of that. Just, that can happen with anything. And of course, it's also a risk with technology. It's very addictive. It's something that you're just kind of drawn to naturally. I mean, the brain of an adolescent is already wired for social connection and to just continuously like learn how to do that better and have that independence. And so, this is a way they can have both. And so there's a very addictive factor to that. But also social isolation. Surprisingly, social media can promote social isolation quite heavily because, again, you're kind of like learning facts about people kind of secondhand, and you think, oh, I know all about their life, or you might feel an emotional reaction like, wow, it was really nice to read that update, or to read this really poetic post they just made, or to see a picture of what they're doing is really kind of cool. And the truth is that person may or may not know you saw it, and may or may not know what you felt when you saw it. And so there's a breakdown in this social connection, but you feel like you had a social connection.
Right.
So they're misreading what it really should be. And I thought it was interesting in this article. I just giggle about it. They said that social media use is linked to a social isolation, and then in parentheses they had to define what that meant.
Oh my gosh.
Just in case you don't know, it's a lack of social connection and quality relationships with others. Like, you know, so
That's good. I'm glad they defined that for us.
Yeah. And so, because, you know, sometimes people don't realize they are in social isolation. I think that's why, is because sometimes they don't even know, like, I mean, I have all these people on my phone and I can see them, but that face-to-face interaction is very important. This was interesting. And I'll just kind of briefly go over this because I know that there's adverse impact on cognitive and brain development. This one I found interesting. And it was actually they're finding that increased screen time has been associated with poor language development and executive functioning, particularly in very young children, which I expected, as well as poor language development. But this was, they found, also true across all children. And so they also said for study done between 8 and 12, that the more screen time and less reading were associated with decreased brain connectivity between the regions controlling word recognition and both language and cognitive control. And so those are important for reading comprehension and a negative impact of screen time on the developing brain. So it's really interesting that there's also a decrease of white matter. Found that fascinating.
Yeah.
And last is sleep. And this one, they said that they're not sure why it impacts sleep so greatly, but it really has. The more screen time, the more screen use, it has affected sleep from an actual brain structural change. And so what they've said is that they don't know if it's because of the blue light or if it's because of something else just related to, maybe you're checking it before bed and it's kind of in your mind, or maybe your brain is now used to just kind of like that more high functioning back and forth multitask kind of ADHD type of behavior. And so it's more difficult to sleep. But they do know for a fact that blue light does have a significant impact on the circadian rhythm of your sleep. So they talk about that. And the positive things, however, for people who are having a cognitive decline, if they were to use technology more, they actually are able to increase the brain productivity in the brain. They showed 2 pictures of before using technology and the internet and all the other things that they have, technology has to offer, and then after, and it's like a whole different brain. It's very lit up. So anyone who's experiencing cognitive decline, older adults, or even teens looking to kind of increase different skill sets, like learning a new language, or, you know, learning, I often recommend apps to my clients for being able to say, hey, this is how you can learn how to learn a new skill with a coping behavior. And, you know, this is something you can do to learn how to do more meditation. And these are skills you can learn with technology. And so there are so many ways that your brain can actually grow because of it too. So I think at the end of the day, like I said, a big takeaway is, you know, watch the blue light, you know, just put in natural boundaries. And the excessive use is really the biggest hit, I think.
And it's good to know, I mean, that there are positives, because it does feel like technology does get a bad rap, especially when we're talking about, you know, education a lot, or attention, or things like that. So it is good to know that there are some positives. And it kind of sounds like when you're explaining, you know, we're talking about communication with parents, and you're explaining that the technology piece is hindering, like teenagers aren't necessarily able to understand certain social cues or body language or things like that. So we have parents who, you know, they learn how to do all that and they practice that every day. And then we have teens who maybe aren't in that practice. So right there, that could be a huge roadblock to communication. So I'm going to I'm gonna go to Kevin. What would you say if you could pick one or two are some of the biggest roadblocks that parents have concerning communicating with their teen? So the things you hear parents talk about concerning trying to get through to their teenager.
That is a good question. That is a very good question. I think one of the big ones that comes to my mind is they just don't know how to get into that deeper level of vulnerability with their teens. That there seems to really be this block between how was your day? Fine. Okay. It was big, nothing happened. To actually feeling that emotional experience and that relationality, and that is a big part of it, and that they really struggle with, because almost every parent that I have come through my door wants to be there and support their kid emotionally and care for them and get to these deeper areas and these deeper relationships. And it's kind of going back to that developmental period. It's such a difficult one because the teen is experiencing this natural draw to be close to mom and dad while also experience this natural draw to be away from mom and dad. And so it's so difficult for them as well. But I feel like that's a big one, is parents have a really hard time getting to the point of being in that intimate connection with their kid and their teen. And kind of how I respond to them is, on one hand, there's a level of disconnection that is developmentally appropriate. And that goes back to regulating our own emotions, right? On this one level, you may just not get that from your teen during this time period. And that's normal. And that sucks, but that's normal. Yeah. On another side of it, a lot of times it's, don't worry about jumping into the deep end. Don't worry about jumping into the deep end. Do activities with them, play with them, watch a show with them, get interested in what they're interested in. That's a big one. It's like, if they're interested in, Roblox, or if they're interested in a particular show or particular game, get to know it. Yeah. Get to know it. They may not want you to play with them. That's okay. But if you still get to know it and you show interest in that and you try to move into what they're interested in a very authentic and honest way, that creates a pathway of relationship that they can then choose to engage with. We can't force them to engage with it.
Right.
But if you allow them to choose that, and the more options we give them, the more freedom we give them to choose, the more likely they are to come around to you and choose. But we as the parents have to be the ones who sort of establish that pathway, because the teenager almost definitely won't, nor really should they. Right. And so that is, I would say, is a big one. On top of that is just be curious about the questions you're asking your teen in and of themselves. Are we asking closed-ended questions? Are we asking open-ended questions? The difference between how was your day to tell me something really good that happened today. Right. Starting with the positive, because the standard answer to how was your day, fine. And part of that's our culture, right? That's a standard cultural response. Hey, how's it going? Good. Okay, fine. And so we're trained to give short responses to those answers. And so you can get specific with them. Yeah, tell me about science class today. If they like science, if they're a big athlete, tell me how practice went today. I would love to hear about that. How did it go with Coach Blank? Or how did you and this teammate that you've been having a hard time with go? This really intentional pursuit with specific connections, specific questions, specific sharing can be really impactful, as opposed to the more broad strokes. Because I think a lot of parents, because we're insecure about how to connect with teens, because that's just weird time period where there's so much ambivalence, there's so much change, that we then allow our own nervousness to kind of take hold, and we're kind of like treading lightly. We don't want to push too far. We don't want to come back. And it's really difficult for us too. Yeah. But a lot of that ambivalence gets transferred to the teen. And so going back to self-regulation of, okay, let me ground myself. If I'm feeling insecure, if I'm feeling ambivalent about if my teen even wants me to, pursue them or not, it's okay. Pursue them. When in doubt, pursue, but pursue with an open hand. Pursue invitationally. And if they reject you, don't take it personally.
Yeah.
They're supposed to, and it's hard. But the more that invitational approach is presented with consistency and authenticity, the teen knows that you're there. And they will come around to you, come back for you, and come to you in times of need, even if it's not only once in a blue moon. They
Right.
will come back to you because they know that you're there. And I think that's can be really impactful and something I see a lot of people struggling with, of navigating that that ambivalence and that uncertainty during this particular phase of life.
And I feel like when you said, to take interest in things they're interested in, even if you're not interested in it, you're not interested in playing Roblox, or this show, doing that, even just for a short, for a little bit each day or for a couple times during the week, that then kind of builds, and maybe the teen doesn't even recognize it, but builds a trust so that when there is something they need to go to their parents about, they have this trust. And they probably don't even know they're building it, but it's just, as human beings, we like it when people take interest in what we're interested in. So that's a very solid piece of advice that people, a very actionable step that parents can take to build the connection, and just don't get your feelings hurt. If your
I
teen
think one
doesn't want to
question,
be with you, don't get your
I
feelings
think one question that's really cool to ask, that like I forget where I got it from somebody, and I stuck with me, is this question of always ask yourself, okay, what am I reinforcing? As a counselor, as a friend, as a parent, as whoever in this context, though, as a parent, like, what am I reinforcing with this response I'm giving, or this thing I'm doing? So often I have, parents who their kids are in a bad situation and they come to them, but they were breaking the rules, breaking the law, whatever. And the parent gets upset or angry because they're like, you put yourself in that situation. What are you doing? What are you doing that for? A totally understandable response, right?
Right.
But the kid then learns, okay, don't go to mom and dad.
Yep.
Don't go to mom and dad. And so I just really want to encourage, like, when kids come and reveal these honest things that are really difficult, really praise that honesty. Positive affirmation is scientifically more effective than negative. And so like that positive reinforcement is really powerful. Don't forget that, always asking ourselves, what are we reinforcing in everything that we're doing can really go a long way.
Yeah. I
Very
love
good
everything
point.
that Kevin is talking about, and I agree with all of it. And
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know if, are we going to talk, or do you want me to talk about like the teens perspective?
Yeah, so I was hoping to flip it on you. So, what would you say some of the biggest roadblocks that teens have concerning communicating with their parents, or what are they saying to you when they come to you about that communication piece?
Yeah. And like I said, everything Kevin said was awesome. And I feel like what he did is he described it really well, of course, for the parents, but also it's exactly like he also did for the teens as well, in a way too, in his answer. And I just love everything he said, Kevin. So, but it's so true. What I see oftentimes is that teens report to me that they're feeling like they're not being heard, like their parents aren't really listening to what they're saying, or they're making assumptions, or they're kind of like shutting them down. Another big one is they feel like their parents are being emotionally manipulative, or if they ever talk about their own emotions at all, that it's always taken as manipulation instead of just their parent expressing like their own individual feelings. And I've started to kind of see, just in my time with teens and with the parents and the families, that I kind of see a progression. And I have young kids, so my brain always starts there first, because naturally around my littles all day, and they're so wonderful. My youngest is 2, and then my oldest is 7. And when you first have your kid, like, they're so much a part of you, quite literally. I mean, for those of us who are able to carry our children within us, and not every mother can carry her own child, but for mothers who can, like, that of course starts already that physical, like literally one and the same person. Right. And they feel your emotions throughout the day, and you can feel theirs. I mean, you can feel when they move, you can feel when they get scared from a noise, and so there's this beautiful connection. And even for families who have not had that experience of feeling their child within their own bodies, there is that connection still, because that baby feels what you feel what that baby feels. That connection you have when you're holding that child is so crucial. And so really it's that child can't see themselves without you. Right. So literally they are you and you are them. And there's this very much an enmeshment, but in a healthy way, if you will. Right. And so it moves from there, right? And you're starting to move from there, and it starts getting more and further apart. But what's interesting is that this is more of a theory, and also just from what I've seen, witnessed in my time with families and with teens, is that I feel as though teens are at the age where they are exploding developmentally with their social independence, exploratory, all of these things, which is wonderful. However, they haven't quite caught up with their like social emotional intelligence in so far as being able to recognize, I am an individual and my parent is individual. What might my parent be feeling and what might I be feeling? And how are we two separate people? Like, they don't have that yet.
Yeah.
And so I believe that it's almost as if that connection that you share with them is still there, and they still see themselves as you and you are them. And so whatever the parent says is what they are. And
Right.
whatever the parent does is about them. And whatever like the child does is what the parent is. And
Right.
whatever the child does is what the parent feels and is, so it's like,
Yeah.
there's this unity still, there's this connection still. And so, so what I've come to find is that, it's difficult because parents are seeing some of this independence. And then if they start engaging with the teen, like, well, when you do this, it makes us feel like that, or, I'm angry with you for this. The teen is just like having a really hard time literally understanding it as an individual person reacting to who they are as an individual person. Instead, they see it as, yep, you think I'm bad, you have all these things to say about me. And so I think there's a little bit piece of that kind of going on, where there's a little bit of, they're still growing in their ability to share in their vulnerability. They're still growing in their ability for them to communicate themselves and to receive as well, to receive and to be receptive to what their parents say. And what's wonderful is, because that connection is there, they always want their parents to be there for them. They always want their parents to be interested in what they're doing, which is why I love all the suggestions you gave with just like, be involved in their life, be involved in what they're interested in. That's great advice, because it's going to be what connects you with that person, and it does build trust. And so that's one of the things that I see as being really important. And I'm moving up because the sun is moving up. Face is going to be gone soon, so I'm trying to like stay in the picture. So I actually have a quote from a client, and I had permission to share it anonymously, if it's okay, from her perspective of what it is like just kind of interacting in this dynamic. If you don't mind me sharing that quote. So I will pull that up here a second. I just loved it, and it was so wonderful to hear just everything that she said. So, okay. When I was a kid, it was much easier to have a relationship with my parents, but now I can see and know my parents' flaws, like how they were late for an event, and how they're like, my mom tends to hide away when she's upset. They don't always prepare, and I'm starting to see things I didn't see before when I was just a child, and I'm reacting to them. My parents must assume that I don't want or need the same encouragement I do as a kid, but I absolutely do. There is so much comparison now as I get older, and not only is there pressure, there's so much pressure versus from when I was a kid. And she mentioned just, this is not part of the quote, but part of that was mentioning grades, sports, social media, like just social things, even there's a huge thing right now of fitting in with like some kind of political ideology. That's huge too. It's like, there's pressure even in that front. And there is so much more to get judged for. And when I do, I get easily sensitive and I can snap, even when I know it's not okay. So when my parents ask me questions and I snap, it's because I am already on edge and I feel like I'm being judged for everything I do, no matter where I am.
Wow.
Yes, that's powerful.
I do think that's very powerful. And I think that is I'm glad you shared that. I think it's a really good place to kind of leave it, because I think if parents understood that that's how their child was feeling, they would come at communication in a whole different way. I think that parents don't know that. They don't know that's how their kids are feeling, you know? And I think that probably a lot of kids have that same kind of feel, like those same feelings, but maybe they don't know how to verbalize it like the person that you just quoted did. So I think that was very powerful. So thank you for sharing that. The next time we do a part 2 for communicating with teens, it will be scenario based. So tune in for, we will have a couple new faces and we will be talking about specific scenarios that you might have seen or have experienced, and maybe you can take advice from the therapist and use them in your own life. So thank you again for watching, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you guys so much for being part of this.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Alyssa.
No problem.